Hi, this is Paul, and last week I did a series of videos on the Evening with Matt Dillahunty and Jordan Peterson, and someone on Facebook recommended that I tackle some of the questions. Now I'm going to just talk about question one here in this video, and then I'm going to dive into the material of Don. I can't remember his last name. Hoffman. And this will be an interesting view on the conversation between Peterson and Dillahunty. So let's just dive into question one, and then I'll show you one interesting place to kind of take this.
Thank you, and the floor is yours for a moment.
All right, thank you. I guess this question is mostly for Jordan Peterson. Just to hopefully enlighten a bit more what you mean by God, do you think that if all humanity were to cease to exist, does God still exist?
I don't think I know how to answer that. It's just...
And now again, if you listen to Dillahunty's response video to this video, I don't think he's being fair to Peterson. I think Peterson is honest when he says this, if you understand everything that Peterson is saying.
The situation is too hypothetical. I mean, I can take a crack at some of it, but so human beings are characterized by consciousness and by self-consciousness, and the latter in particular seems to be something relatively unique. There's some vague evidence for self-consciousness of lower sorts in animals, but it's not very compelling. Some of them can recognize themselves in a mirror, but our self-consciousness is accompanied by elaborated imagistic and linguistic models of ourselves and that have been elaborated over large spans of time.
Now, again, if you're coming from a materialist frame, you have no idea why Jordan Peterson begins to answer this question in this way. If you understand anything about phenomenology, anything about how we might know things, and anything about this entire conversation that's going on right now in terms of consciousness and our relationship with consciousness and matter. For example, there are lots of videos out there with the double slit experiment. There are lots of videos out there with the delayed exam with the double slit experiment. You can find, if you just do double slit experiment, you'll find all those videos queued up on YouTube for you. Watch some of them, because right now there's a fierce conversation going on that is dealing with the relationship between consciousness and matter. And again, for most materialists, they're not at all talking about this. They simply assume our ability to know the material world is foundational. And again, this is something that early in the 20th century took a lot of hits, but it's so commonsensical to us that we don't even think about it. So this is why Peterson's okay. The question is a very good one, because it gets into what is Jordan Peterson's conception of God versus, say, Matt Dillahunty's conception of God. God might be, for Matt Dillahunty, someone like Santa Claus. Now you might say, is Santa Claus real? Well, Santa Claus is real enough to provoke an awful lot of spending on Christmas and to provoke videos and things. But in terms of the materialist framework of the realism that materialists are assuming, you would say Santa Claus isn't real because we can't fly to the North Pole and lay our hands on a big fat man in a red suit who hangs around with elves and drives a sleigh with reindeer that fly. Therefore, Santa Claus isn't real. But, well, okay, Jordan Peterson, so is God real enough to provoke things like Santa Claus is real enough to provoke things? Now Peterson is taking this question seriously, and he's beginning with consciousness because of how Peterson is framing the world.
There are lots of elements of being that would disappear if we disappeared.
Now, again, if you go back and watch some of my previous videos, you'll have to figure out what Jordan Peterson means by being, and that's what he's using in terms of to talk about reality in this phenomenological world.
Now, it isn't even obvious to what extent that's true, right? Because I don't really understand to what degree being itself is dependent on consciousness. Like the classic.
See, in other words, he's first talking about, well, what's the relationship between matter and consciousness? Well, that's really complicated. Again, just look at the double slit experiment. Now you might say, well, that's electrons and stuff. That's really that doesn't really, that's just all this crazy stuff with quantum physics. That's not with us. We're living in this world, and there's this computer here, and there's microphone here, and this camera here, and these lobster up here, and these books behind me. That's the real world. Now, again, why do I think Peterson is not being evasive? Because, okay, you keep pestering the guy to answer this question. He's going to try. The thing is, he knows full well that the way he answers it, you're not going to like, because you're not dealing with the same frame he is. And every time you try and back him into the materialist frame, he will say, I don't believe it. Well, okay, so now you have, in a sense, a worldview conflict.
Materialist Enlightenment view, which I would say is basically a 19th century view, something like that, is that if all consciousness was extinguished, the material substrate of the universe would continue unchanged.
Go back and look at the rationality rules guy, if a tree falls in the forest, all of this kind of stuff. And that's, if Peterson's saying, that's a 19th century perspective.
But I don't really buy that as an argument, because I think that the material substrate, I think that reality is reality is an interaction between what we perceive of as the material substrate and consciousness itself.
Now, for most of this video, I'm going to get into that, but pay attention to his words here. There's a material substrate there, but that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is this interaction between consciousness and then we're going to go into Don Hoffman, and Don Hoffman's going to use the language of an interface. That this book I'm holding, this cell phone holder I'm holding, this can of gas that I use to clean out my computers. I'm holding this, but my actual interaction is a user interface that has everything to do with consciousness. And it isn't at all true, it isn't at all obvious that if my consciousness is removed, that this user interface that the materialists are simply calling reality, or this reality they're trying to correlate to, would actually be here. Now, I know some of you at this point are throwing up your hands, and I made the comment about flat Earth. I'm going to go there again, and I'm going to talk more about it. Switch.
And so then when you destroy consciousness, you destroy reality. And what that leaves, I don't really understand, because it doesn't have any temporality in any obvious sense. It doesn't have any size in any obvious sense without the introduction of an invisible observer. So
the introduction of an invisible observer. Now, again, you go back to my rationality rules video and you look at the monarchical vision. That monarchical vision is the individual observer. It's, in a sense, what we do. We take out the subjective and we imagine this impartial observer that sees reality as it is. But what Peterson is saying, that reality that is a function of our consciousness. Now, again, for the materialists, I'd say the naive realism of the materialists, this is going to drive them crazy, because they're going to say, that's what we have, that's the real world. And what the rest of these scientists are going to say is, yeah, but that's not what science says.
Vanishes without human consciousness and self-consciousness. I don't know how to answer the question, does God vanish? Because that brings us back into the same problem that I was talking about earlier, is that it's not exactly easy to understand what people are talking about when they say God.
Now, again, if you listen to Dillahunty's response video to this, he'll say, oh, it's just obvious what God is. Well, maybe you're assuming this kind of Southern Baptist God that you used to believe in, and I talked about that in the framing video. That's your assumption. But Peterson does not hold that assumption by any means about God. In fact, and I think his answer here bears my thesis that Peterson is functionally an agnostic when it comes to God. And I know that's a fierce debate. Is he a Christian? Is he not? Is he a covert Christian? What will he do? How will he act? Can some evangelist bring him into the fold? Whatever. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to this conversation. Listen to him. You keep asking him this question about God. He keeps trying to tell you, but you keep not liking the answer, so you keep hitting him with the question again.
Because when you ask the question, would God disappear? There's an assumption there that whatever God is understandable and boxable, like a simple concept, like a chair, and that we both share the same conception. And, there's endless warnings in deep religious literature against assuming that you understand what that term means, or sometimes even for using the term. So
he's talking about Judaism there.
that's the best I'm going to be able to do with that question.
Thank you.
So there you go. There's the answer. And again, I don't like that answer. I think he's being evasive. Well, let's take a look at this one guy, Donald Hoffman. Now I'm going to pick a little bit from a TED Talk that he did, which you can find quite easily. And I'm going to take quite a bit more from a conversation that he had with someone else, which I think digs a little bit deeper into this and touches on some of these elements that addresses why Peterson is talking the way he is. Because again, a lot of people out there listen to Peterson say, well, he's being evasive, he's dodging it, he's trying to wiggle out of it. And again, I kind of hear Dillahunty complaining about that in his response video. But I don't think any of that is true of Peterson. It's just people are not understanding what he's wrestling with when it comes to the relationship between matter and consciousness. So let's have this guy, Donald Hoffman, give us a little hand.
I think we've simply made a false assumption. Once we fix it, we just might solve this problem. Today I'd like to tell you what that assumption is, why it's false, and how to fix it. Let's begin with a question. Do we see reality as it is? I open my eyes, and I have an experience that I describe as a red tomato a meter away. As a result, I come to believe that in reality, there's a red tomato a meter away. I then close my eyes, and my experience changes to a gray field. But is it still the case that in reality, there's a red tomato a meter away?
If a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? And again, some of us might jump in and say, well, we figured this out when we were 2. If I close my eyes, this book is still here. I know that. I act on that. Well, the question isn't, can I reach out and touch this book? The question is, what's the relationship with this book and me perceiving it, whether by sight or by touch? What's the relationship between this book and my consciousness? And again, the materialists will say, oh, that's obvious. Well, we believe in science. Well, listen to these scientists, because these are not Christians. And they're saying it's a whole lot weirder than we thought. And a lot of this science we actually knew something about at the beginning of the 20th century. And actually, philosophers have been talking about this for a while.
I think so. But could I be wrong? Could I be misinterpreting the nature of my perceptions? We've misinterpreted our perceptions before. We used to think the earth is flat because it looks that way. Pythagoras discovered that we were wrong. Then we thought that the earth is the unmoving center of the universe, again because it looks that way. Copernicus and Galileo discovered, again, that we were wrong. Galileo then wondered if we might be misinterpreting our experiences in other ways. He wrote, I think that tastes, odors, colors, and so on reside in consciousness. Hence, if the living creature were removed, all these qualities would be annihilated.
Now let's hold it here because we've got a lot more to cover. Oops. Now let's get into this language, and what Don Hoffman is going to say, that this material world that we're interacting with is, he's not saying there isn't a material world, okay? He isn't saying that there isn't this thing that language we're using in terms of objective reality. He's not saying that either. He's saying what we interact with is like a user interface on a computer. We who use computers we understand, especially those of us who've been using computers long enough, that used to, have a disk operating system and would type in code. And the first computer I ever touched was one that my college roommate had. I think it had 64K of memory and that was just RAM and had no actual storage memory. So every time we wanted to run a program, we had to type the program in and for it to run. And computers have come a long way since then. But what is this language of space-time, and how does it relate to reality?
Right.
That's right. So the starting point is the recognition that the very language of our perceptions of space and time and physical objects with matter and shapes and colors and so forth, that very language has been shaped by natural selection simply to keep us alive, not to tell us anything about the nature of objective reality as it is. Mm-hmm. And so there's no reason to believe that any of that language.
Now I want to pause there, because again, if you watch the TED Talk, basically he'll say that he figured out how to basically run simulations of evolution by putting it down into a math problem, and he ran creatures that could know reality and creatures that were purely Darwinistic, and at every point the Darwinists outcompeted the other guys. Actually, maybe I should just play that. Okay, I'm just going to jump in here.
So this
back in the TED Talk.
An important technical question. Does natural selection really favor seeing reality as it is? Fortunately, we don't have to wave our hands and guess. Evolution is a mathematically precise theory. We can use the equations of evolution to check this out. We can have various organisms or artificial worlds compete and see which survive and which thrive, which sensory systems are more fit. A key notion in those equations is fitness. Consider this steak. What does this steak do for the fitness of an animal? Well, for a hungry lion looking to eat, it enhances fitness. For a well-fed lion looking to mate, it doesn't enhance fitness. And for a rabbit in any state, it doesn't enhance fitness. So fitness does depend on reality as it is, yes, but also on the organism, its state, and its action. Fitness is not the same thing as reality as it is, and it's fitness and not reality as it is that figures centrally in the equations of evolution. So in my lab, we have run hundreds of thousands of evolutionary game simulations with lots of different randomly chosen worlds and organisms that compete for resources in those worlds. Some of the organisms see all of the reality, others see just part of the reality, and some see none of the reality, only fitness. Who wins? Well, I hate to break it to you, but perception of reality goes extinct. In almost every simulation, organisms that see none of reality but are just tuned to fitness drive to extinction all the organisms that perceive reality as it is. So the bottom line is evolution does not favor vertical or accurate perceptions. Those perceptions of reality go extinct.
And he's going to get into that as we go back to this video.
And anything that could be described in that language is going to be the nature of the objective world. And that's pretty strong. What that means is that whatever objective reality is, the chances that thinking about it in terms of space and time and matter and physical objects and colors and shapes is just the wrong language. You'll get nowhere. The analogy would be, suppose I said, I would like you to tell me what it a detailed theory of the inner workings of a computer, but the only language I'm going to let you use is the language of the pixels on your desktop. So you have positions and colors of pixels. That's your language. Go for it. Try as best you can to describe how a computer works. Good luck. I've made it impossible for you because I've given you a language that's not the right language to do the job. And so that's the same problem that we have when we start trying to think of using the language of space and time and position, momentum, spin, shape, mass, and matter to describe the objective reality. We've given ourselves an impossible task, just like asking ourselves to describe a computer just based on the pixels on the desktop. So what we have to do is to be willing to let go altogether of some very deeply held beliefs, that there's any resemblance whatsoever between the nature of our perceptions and even the language of our perceptions and the nature of objective reality. That's a very, very difficult position for us to take. We seem to be very, very wedded to the idea that our perceptions are giving us some kind of insight into the nature of reality. At least the language of our perceptions is the right language to describe reality. And that's what I'm saying we need to call into question. Now,
And by the way, one of the things you're calling into question, I'm not sure if you mentioned this in your list, but is causality itself. So
absolutely.
if you see billiard balls bumping into each other on a computer and it looks like the ball is causing the other ball to move, well, you know that's not really happening on your computer screen. There's not causality happening on the screen. Rather, they're both just behaving in accordance with the script. You're saying the causality we think and this has been suggested by philosophers like Hume and so on, that we can't really confidently infer actual causality. We never really know more than that certain things regularly precede other certain things and so on. We never know for sure that causality per se happens. Anyway, that's another weird thing about your theory.
That's right. So I don't necessarily need to give up the notion of causality of some kind of entities. But so I'm happy to contemplate the idea that the notion of causality itself is not a fiction, but that the specific causality that we all know and love, namely that a physical object like a billiard ball hitting another billiard ball and making it move, that's genuine causality. That I think we will have to give up. So
now genuine causality doesn't mean to say that it's an illusion watching that, but rather it's an interface.
One, the 8-ball, the white ball hits the 8-ball into the corner pocket. We can say that the cue ball caused the 8-ball to move, and for practical purposes, that's fine. It's a useful fiction, but strictly speaking, it's a fiction. There is perhaps some causal sequence.
Now, I can't imagine what Dillahunty would do if we told him that all this stuff that he's banking on, this guy calls a fiction, because he's used to calling Jordan Peterson and religion a fiction.
What's going on in the objective world, and all I can do as a humble member of the species Homo sapiens is to represent it in terms of a cue ball hitting an 8-ball and having a fiction of a causal interaction between those two.
And by the way, in some scenarios where causality is an illusion, people are actually talking about a completely deterministic universe. So what they're really doing is just watching a movie and everything has been prescribed from the beginning. And the idea of like causality is false. Yours is not necessarily, as I understand it, a completely determined universe. At least you use terms like choice in your theory, which we'll get into a little, right? So you're not talking about a deterministic universe necessarily.
Not necessarily a deterministic universe.
Okay.
And I should point out that the theory that I'm working here has two separate aspects, and that one could buy the one and not the other. So the first aspect that I'm fairly confident about is that evolution entails that we almost surely do not see reality as it is. That I'm pretty confident.
Again, that's based on the video that I just showed you, that evolution says creatures that view reality lose to creatures that prove more fit.
If you buy evolution, then I think that you have to buy the conclusion that space and time and physical objects are a species-specific desktop and not a depiction of reality. Now,
Now again, that might frighten you, but if you think that through, it actually begins to make sense of the two-slit experiment. It begins to make sense of this relationship between our consciousness and matter. If what we're seeing is a user interface, then in fact we are, well, where does this user interface coming from? Well, it's coming from us. This is, you watch Jonathan Pajot and you look at this funny quotation in the New Testament that I'll tell you I've racked my brains over a number of times over the years when I had to preach on it, about the eye giving light. Well, this is kind of that we are offering this user interface. There's a material substrata that's out there, and it's real, but we're offering this interface to it, and that's somehow they meet in the middle. And that this is a truer way to talk about what life is like and how we are in the world. And that then makes, again, more sense of the double slit experiment. If you're in a materialistic, this naive realism, you can't make sense of that double slit experiment. Now these guys are more careful, and you know, they're scientists. I'm not, but and this is where he goes through evolution and truth. I'm not going to play that because I think the shorter version, the better version, was in the TED Talk. That's at the beginning of it. But now, basically here he explains where this leads, and that all the materialists, again, materialism has been the default culture and assumption of the scientific community. And so the hard problem, the brain problem, this is the thing that Thomas Nagel is wrestling with, and Thomas Nagel is looking at the materialists and saying, no. This hard problem of the relationship between matter and consciousness, which, again, Rupert Sheldrake, I brought him into some of the other conversations here, and again, watch his interview on the Rebel Wisdom video, which was really quite excellent. That's the hard problem, because we have no idea how matter creates consciousness. And so if you look again at the Dillahunty, Jordan Peterson conversation, Dillahunty bears down on this. Matter creates this, and we are in direct relationship with these objects. And Peterson keeps looking at Dillahunty, Sam Harris, and saying, y'all are part of the 19th century. You're Newtonian. You're not Darwinian. Well, why aren't they Darwinian? See, Hoffman would say, I'm Darwinian because Darwin says you don't see truth. You see fitness. You say, oh boy, well, how does that make sense? Now, I'm going to get to the Christian stuff a little bit later, because I know some of you Christians out there might be freaking out a little bit. Just hang on. It'll be all right, you know, because quite frankly, I believe being a Christian lets us be freer in terms of exploring ideas than being wedded in terms of your religion to one of these groups. Because I think if you have a religion other than science or politics, you can actually be freer and more true with science and politics if those aren't also functioning as your religion. If you actually have a religion, you can, you know, deal with the political winds that blow back and forth. You can deal with the different scientific winds that blow back and forth, because your existential foundation is standing upon something other than these cultural frameworks. So there's your little mini sermon, free with the lecture. So I think this is picking it up towards the end of the video. It's an excellent video, good to watch. Nope, not the end.
Then to solve the mind-body problem, I have to solve it in a different way than everybody else is trying to solve it, right? Most people, 99% of the researchers trying to solve the mind-body problem are starting with the physical reality, in particular, you know, brain states, brain activity, and they have to show how consciousness might arise from that or be identical to that. Mm-hmm. I have to go the other direction. I start with a mathematical theory of consciousness completely independent of any notion of space, time, or matter. Completely independent. And it's my burden then to say that this mathematical model of consciousness can give rise to all of the modern mathematics of, say, quantum mechanics and general relativity.
Okay.
So if I cannot if I cannot derive from this theory of conscious agents, first, what we already know about quantum field theory, gravity, and then hopefully a new theory of quantum gravity itself, then I'm wrong. It's just that simple.
And I appreciate about this guy. He's a scientist. He's saying, I'm not basing my life on this thing. I'm working on these problems. Go ahead and prove me wrong. That's how science is supposed to work.
There can be conscious agents that
Now we're going to get into question one. Is God before the world, or is God a function of all of these human beings and our imaginations, dependent on material reality for our thoughts about God? God being the kind of being, let's say, analogous to Santa Claus.
not only don't correspond to electrons per se. Well, first of all, there can be conscious agents that don't correspond to any of the physical phenomena we currently describe as part of a scientific framework. Is that right? Don't
Absolutely.
correspond to protons or anything else.
Absolutely.
And it isn't just that science hasn't yet discovered the physical phenomena that would correspond to the conscious agents. You're saying that in this sense, conscious agents just are more fundamental than what we refer to as the physical world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So first came the conscious agents, and then came the physical world. But see, this is where I get a little...
Yeah, because again, when we talk about if your materialism is your religion, now you're going to have to make a religious conversion. And that's existentially, psychologically, a much bigger leap than if you already have a religious position and you're not borrowing from science or politics to create your religious experiment. But now he's going to ask a question. He said, hey, dude, if you're right, holy cow.
Caught up with the chicken and egg problem when I start putting this in terms of natural selection, right? I mean, for natural selection to happen, as we conventionally conceive of it, you've got these conscious agents. I mean, we assume that they're
Now, maybe I don't want to be wrong with Robert Wright, and I don't know anything about him, so he might be a religious man. I didn't mean to imply that of him.
conscious. But anyway, we've got these agents, and then you've got this like world for them to respond to. And it's true that the world consists partly of each other. Bacteria respond partly to each other. But in the first instance, when the first self-replicating form of
Now let me pause here, because I think you probably heard enough where this question is going. Because don't misunderstand me. Part of the experience you get as being a pastor is being exposed to a lot of different religious systems, a lot of different religious people. You're going to find a bunch of Don Hoffman videos with a lot of New Agers, okay? And I can completely understand why the New Age community and listening to Don Hoffman feels validated, because I'm a spiritual being, having a physical experience. When you hear this, you begin to think that. Let's be a little careful here, because again, I am not saying, and this is where at some point we're going to have to figure out how this stuff fits together, because I also know that there is real construction between my physical self and my conscious self, or there's real relationship. I have a real history, and to argue that I am simply a physical being, being possessed by some consciousness that is overwhelming, cutting out the biological connectedness to history, I'm not in favor of that either, because I believe I'm very much constructed, and I am the son of my parents, and I am in many ways the product of my upbringing and my education and my experience and the sociology of knowledge and all of that. I'm not throwing any of that away. And so finding the relationship between this consciousness and this material world, well, that's still difficult. But again, now pay attention. He's saying, I'm starting with consciousness and then adding material. I'm not divorcing them. But as Robert Wright is saying, well, wait a minute. Darwinian selection is very much a a relationship between consciousness and the material world and the environment. And you heard Don Hoffman mention that before. That's part of the equation. I'm trying not to say as much. So this is, this is very, very hard. And it, again, gets back to the question, well, what comes first? This is where you have the chicken and the egg problem.
Organic life came into being. It was responding strictly to a physical, so it's like the physical world, which we normally conceive of as unconscious, was a given. And then self-replicating things came along and started responding to it. And so in the conventional reckoning, you just have this dichotomy. Right. Now, I recognize that dichotomy in a way rests on the assumption that what we refer to as the inorganic world is not conscious, and you would take issue with that assumption. Exactly. But still, I can't be alone in having trouble like wrapping my mind around this whole thing and kind of vaguely perceiving a kind of chicken and egg problem, right? Even absolutely. You must have this problem a little, right?
Well, yes, because like everybody else, I am naturally a physicalist and a naive realist. Mm-hmm. I believe whenever I'm not thinking carefully, I always believe just naturally that I'm seeing reality as it is. That's just sort of the way we've evolved. Mm-hmm. And so it's very, very difficult to step outside of that.
So this is our interface, and we're at home in our interface.
When evolution itself forces me to take that idea seriously. But the idea is that when I interact with something that to me looks inanimate, like a rock, mm-hmm. It doesn't look living to me. And so I'm not saying that the rock itself is conscious, but that the rock itself is a symbol that I'm using to represent a reality that is completely unlike a rock, a reality that's not in space and time, mm-hmm. and a reality that is in itself a potentially infinitely complex interaction of conscious agents. But because I have
the reality itself is an interaction of conscious agents.
Yeah,
you mean including you, or not necessarily including you?
Well, I'm certainly interacting with it. So yes.
But I mean, but I mean, before you started interacting with it, I mean, you would say, I guess, if it exists in itself, then it itself has to be an interaction of conscious agents.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That's the ontology I'm proposing here. There's conscious agents all the way down. And that's what exists. Even if the conscious agent that I call me didn't exist, there would be other conscious agents. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm interacting with. Now, because I'm a finite conscious agent, I have finite representational capabilities. Mm-hmm. This is presumably, though, an infinitely complicated universe of conscious agents. That means that almost all of it is beyond my representational capacity. My ability to represent it, I can represent only a probability zero subset of this reality. And the parts that I do represent, so when I interact with you, by looking at your expressions and your body language and so forth, I can get some idea about your conscious state, the kinds of experiences you're having, your mood and so forth. I get some insight into you as a consciousness. Mm-hmm. When I interact with my cat, maybe a little bit less. When I interact with a rat, even less. With an ant, even much less. And when I get to the point of a rock, I've essentially given up. But in terms of understanding the nature of the consciousnesses, right? But that is a limit of my representational system. And here's the problem that we always have. As humans, we tend to conflate the limits of our representational system with an insight into the nature of reality. Mm-hmm. So we mistake.
Hear that again. We tend to conflate the limits of our representational system with the insights into reality. And if you were to ask me to say, well, where does Dillahunty go wrong? It would be right there. Now, again, he keeps the door open and says, well, I'm an agnostic. Okay, fair enough. But if you push him a little further, he'd say, well, what really pisses you off about the beliefs of other people, because surely they hold beliefs in their head. Why should you care? Well, because they act on their beliefs. And I don't want them to act on their beliefs. Therefore, if I want to get rid of the actions, I want to get rid of those beliefs. Okay, so now we're having a human conversation.
Our limits for an insight into the nature of reality. It's like saying that the icons on my desktop only have two-dimensional positions and pixels, therefore reality can only have 2 dimensions and pixels and nothing else. Well, no, that's just a limit of my desktop. If I could just sort of think outside of the box, I would realize that most of the categorizations I make in the world, like between animate and inanimate, are artifacts of the limits of my perceptual system. They're artifacts of the fact that I have to give up at some point in what I can represent of the nature of reality.
You want to see a quick summary on why Jordan Peterson is having a hard time talking to Dillahunty and Sam Harris? It's right there. That's exactly where it is. They are assuming, this Dillahunty and the atheist evangelists are assuming, well, this is the limit, therefore stop. Well, they add an ought to they add the ought to the limit. Well, you should stop there too. And the thing I've never been able to figure out about the materialists is, since I have a hard time figuring out where you get your oughts from anyway, why can't I just do what I want? Now, I'm not going down the road that Dillahunty went, that I'm going to become an axe murderer. But the question of morality comes because you have a difficult time getting to your oughts if that's all that you have. So where are we? Yeah, and now I wanted to just play the last little bit of this video because, again, go Google the double slot experiment. Go Google the question of atoms and quantum, and what C.S. Lewis does in Miracles is, because this was just, this wasn't too old when C.S. Lewis was writing Miracles in the 50s. He was saying, this indeterminacy that we have with atomic particles suggests that there's an openness underneath us. And if there's an openness underneath us, then in fact there might be a front door. If there's an open underneath us, then there might be a front door. So what does this mean? Well, and we say, wow, that's the quantum level. Everything's weird. The answer he's about to give here is the best answer I've heard so far.
But the evolutionary games force me to take a strong position. If space and time and physical objects, position, momentum, is the wrong language to describe reality, then I'm forced to interpret the quantum formalism and my own theory to say an electron cannot have a position or momentum when it's not observed. If it does, then there's no reason to listen to me any further. I'm completely wrong. And the objection that people have to this is they say, well, how in the world can that be a testable statement? I mean, if you're not looking, if you're not observing, then how can you know what's going on? And so there's two ways to think about this. First, take the opposite statement that everybody believes, that that the electron does have a position and a spin when it's not observed, right? Or that a rock has a position when it's not observed. Everybody thinks, of course, that's a genuine scientific statement, and it's probably true.
But we can't verify it.
Yeah, the question would be, how, if it's scientific, then it has to be falsifiable. And how would you falsify it? Well, you'd have to show that it's not the case that the electron doesn't have a position when it's not observed. In other words, my hypothesis needs to be part of that whole package.
Yeah, but if you set up a video camera to record the rock when you're not there and you come back, what would you say about that evidence? Would you say that the video camera was itself conscious, or would you say that there's some kind of retrospective effect of consciousness, or what?
Well, you don't know about anything about the rock until you yourself view the video. True. So you don't know, the assumption that the video exists when you're not looking is part of that whole assumption that you're making there. So it's a far more clever experiment that has to be done to test this hypothesis. Just taking a video and then looking at the video later is not going to do it, because the question still arises, did the camera itself exist when you weren't looking? Every time I look, I see a camera and I see a video, but that doesn't mean that a camera and a video exist when I don't look, right? That doesn't logically follow. And so it turned out, by the way, very, very bright people like Pauli and others thought that this question was not a scientific question, that it was like asking how many angels dance on the head of a pin. To ask, does an electron have a position when it's not observed? But it turns out John Bell, in 1962, 63, something like that, showed that this is not an angels dancing on the head of a pin kind of question. It's an empirical question. He came up with very interesting mathematics called Bell's inequalities that gives you a precise way to test the hypothesis that an electron does not have a dynamical property like spin when it's not observed. Clean. It's one of the deepest successes of the human mind is Bell's theorem. And in the years since Bell published that, there have been over a dozen very, very careful tests. And in every case, the experiments come out compatible with the interpretation that an electron has no dynamical properties when it's not observed. Now, no experiment ever forces a theoretical interpretation. I mean, that's just part of elementary philosophy of science. No data ever force a scientific theory to be, true. Right. There's always an infinite number of theories that are compatible with any data. So I'm being very, very careful when I say that all of these experiments the results are always compatible with the interpretation that an electron does not have a position or a spin when it's not observed.
Right, and in fact, probably more common interpretation of some of this stuff is that what forces the electron to assume a definite location and everything is interaction with a macroscopic physical measuring device, not observation by what we think of as a conscious being per se. That's an alternative interpretation, right?
That's been one of the interpretations that quantum physicists have tried to give. In particular, Bohr, with the Copenhagen interpretation, tried to do that. I'm taking a very, very different tack. I'm saying that electrons and any physical objects that have position and momentum and so forth are just a human species-specific representation of a reality that's utterly different. And so it's no surprise, since electrons are nothing but our symbols. It's no surprise that those symbols don't exist when we don't token them, when we don't observe.
Let that sink in. That makes sense.
They only exist when we observe because they are the symbols that represent our observations.
Okay. So I think you've given us plenty to ponder, and I myself have listened to this conversation several times and ponder it before interrogating you further. But final question.
Yes.
Has your view of the world affected the way you live in any way?
The pragmatist question.
Well, it has in a couple ways. First, it's very painful because I'm, like everybody else, a naive realist at heart. I mean, my default mode is that 3D space and objects in space-time are the reality. And it's when I put on my thinking cap that I have to recognize otherwise. But, frankly, when I go outside and look, it looks like the sun is going around the earth. And every time I step outside, it looks that way. And I know otherwise. And so, it's painful in the same way that it was painful for us to give up a geocentric universe. I mean, people died and were burned at the stake for that. And it's sort of painful.
You better hope we're in better times there, Mr. Don, Dr. Don.
Psychologically for me to give this up. And slowly my perceptions of the world are changing. But it's interesting. Evolution shaped us with symbols that we have to take very, very seriously, right? If we don't take them seriously, we'll die. And we were given the symbols that we have because they're what we need to survive. So we have to take them very, very seriously. And for some reason, we have a penchant for taking them literally. I see a snake, that symbol means there are things I should not do. I shouldn't.
Well, it's more efficient to take them literally. Just think of the time you've wasted not taking them literally. Right. I mean, from evolution's point of view, you're better off not, wasting the time.
Yeah, why waste the time wondering about it? You just get out of the way of the snake, don't step off the cliff, step out of the way of the train. But strictly speaking, taking them seriously does not mean we have to take them literally. And so that dissociation is emotionally wrenching. And so that's affected me that way. But I guess the other effect is it's made life far more interesting. There's a lot to explore, a lot I don't know. And things that I thought I knew, I've had to give up. And so it makes life far more interesting for me as well.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there for now.
So watch the whole video. Very cool. Now, again, now some of you might, this is going to trouble not just, let's say, materialists, especially if you've made materialism your religion, but this is going to trouble Christians, and so I want to say a couple things about that. When I use, let's say, C.S. Lewis to interact with materialists like Dillahunty, well, why do I use Lewis? Because Lewis builds on reason. Well, you know, it's in a sense you can kind of turn this whole thing around and say, well, what if he's right that only fitness, Darwin only works for fitness? Because actually the entire materialist argument is built on the idea that we can get truth out of Darwinian evolution. And Alvin Plantinga and C.S. Lewis and many, many others have basically said, you can't get truth out of Darwinian evolution. Well, where can we get truth from? Now, again, if you read C.S. Lewis's Miracles, pay attention. Dillahunty, and I still want to do a video on supernatural, and actually seeing this has really helped me in terms of the interface representation issue, because C.S. Lewis basically says that we have a sense of the supernatural when we use reason. And the reason C.S. Lewis uses this argument is because he notices that the rationality rules. Listen to Dillahunty. He'll say, reason, 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 reason. I don't see any supernatural. And I think C.S. Lewis would say, yeah, but you're using it. And the reason you don't see it is because you don't see the window when you're looking out at the Grand Canyon. There's something going on here, because in a sense, if you listen to this guy, you might make the argument that, well, then we can know nothing. Well, okay, you can say that. I don't recommend it. But what is reason? Don't we, in a sense, transcend the natural when we use reason? All of our language indicates this. All of our argumentation indicates this. If I'm making this video and you say, well, you're drunk, well, you've just used the argument from reason. And this is exactly why C.S. Lewis, and I haven't picked this up again, but it's still in the back of my mind, I haven't let it go. Too much other stuff has been coming on, and I've been learning too many other things. So when I jump back into miracles, hopefully I'll be stronger. Lewis is making the point that, no, but you're trusting in reason, and you should. Well, that'll give you some hope. Well, and again, this is why I say to go into this as a religious person has an advantage, because in a sense, I am not challenging. You don't have to poke me in my axioms to have this discussion with me. Why? Because I already believe whole things about this consciousness, this infinite consciousness that also has a will that is, in fact, holding me. And about 5 years ago, I was getting kind of serious about trying to write a book. And I was going to get into basically the relational dynamics of this, because what I really noticed when reading the New Testament was that, and I don't know, I'm going to sound evangelical here, and that's going to trigger some of you. Just, keep yourselves calm. Fundamentally, when you look at, let's say, the Lord's relationship with Abraham, or the stories that Jesus tells about heaven and hell, there's a relationship at the base. It's a relationship between consciousnesses. And I don't see that being disturbed by anything he's saying. In fact, I see it strengthened by what he's saying. So this is cool stuff. And again, to get all the way back to the beginning of the video, I think the reason when we look at how Peterson answers the question about God here, Peterson isn't being evasive. I think Peterson he's dealing with these hard questions of consciousness. And most of these questions I was completely unaware of before. Why can't I get rid of that silly thing? I was completely unaware of before listening to Peterson, because I just didn't study any of this stuff. Well, this has taken me down the rabbit hole, and I've been forced to read phenomenology and find this guy and think a lot more carefully about reason and C.S. Lewis and miracles. And as I keep saying, this has been one of the most fun ways to learn. And I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always reading, I'm always learning. And so I've got all these books. And if I showed you all the books on the floor, you'd be horrified because my office is terribly unsorted. But, okay, back to the question. If there were no people, would there be anything? Well, I really like Don Hoffman's idea that this is an interface that we're using. Because, boy, once you get that idea, a whole bunch of other ideas get easier, at least in terms if you're a Christian. So it's Taco Tuesday, and I have to get out of here and meet my family. But yeah, watch those videos by Don Hoffman and let me know what you think.